Ghetto girls love the drama. That's what he said, into a hot mic, 30 seconds before Jasmine Crockett entered the chamber. He didn't flinch. He didn't whisper. Because men like him never expect a woman like her to change the room. But in just 5 minutes, she did more than talk. She showed that while 3.1 million families were losing their food benefits, Trump's team spent $243,168 on steak, cognac, and gold thread napkins. He came with swagger. She came with a folder. And when she opened it, silence became evidence. The kind of silence that doesn't wait to be explained. The kind that walks into a room before the person does. Jasmine Crockett stepped through the grand doors of the Oversight Committee hearing chamber without a single word. No nods to staffers, no performative smiles for cameras. Just the soft, deliberate tap of her heels echoing off the marble floor, like a countdown disguised as footsteps. She moved without rush, without apology. No notes in hand, no phone, just one manila envelope tucked beneath her arm, unlabeled, unadorned, and dangerous in its plainness. The kind of envelope that never brings good news, only consequences. At the far end of the room, Donald Trump reclined in his leather-bound chair, expression unreadable beneath his polished smugness. He adjusted his cufflink with the confidence of a man certain of his dominion. His bench buzzed with quiet amusement. Matt Gaetz whispered something, and laughter spread like oil in a puddle. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even glance their way. Instead, she walked to her assigned seat with the steady rhythm of someone who wasn't here to impress, only to interrupt. The manila envelope hit the table with a sound softer than a whisper, yet somehow louder than anything else in the room. Not slammed, not tossed, placed, the way a surgeon lays down a scalpel before an operation. The C-SPAN red light blinked. Live broadcast. Every American kitchen with an old TV, every nursing home with cable, every diner in Des Moines watching a muted screen suddenly became a witness. No theme music, no voiceover. Just the rising tension of a chamber that had unknowingly stepped into history. Even the committee chair paused his usual routine. We'll now move to opening statements, and looked up. Jasmine didn't speak. Not yet. Her fingers rested lightly on the envelope, tracing the edge like she was weighing something sacred. Then came the shift. It wasn't the room that changed, it was the attention in it. The way aides slowly lowered their phones, how one GOP photographer stopped focusing on Trump's grin and instead adjusted their lens toward a still figure seated in absolute silence. That shift wasn't orchestrated, it was magnetic. Because stillness in a room designed for noise is never accidental. Behind her, Representative Katie Porter leaned forward, sensing it. Rep. Hakeem Jeffries gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, the kind soldiers give each other before breaching a door. But even they didn't know what was inside that envelope. Jasmine had refused to share. Deliberately, across the aisle, a smirk twisted on Trump's face. That theatrical kind of smirk. Half dare, half dismissal. He thought this would be another optic stunt. Another 5-minute clip for social media, forgotten by dinner time. He was wrong. Jasmine finally moved, uncapping her pen with a quiet click that somehow echoed like thunder. She made a single tick on her yellow legal pad. No words, no gestures. Then she pushed the envelope 1 inch forward, toward the mic. The message was unspoken but deafening. This is not a stunt. This is a matchstick. Strike it at your own risk. Trump chuckled audibly. Is this how we legislate now, he said? Not to her, but to no one in particular. Drama first, facts optional. More quiet laughter from his bench. Jasmine didn't look up. She simply flipped one page in her notebook, slowly, deliberately, as if each page turn peeled back a curtain no one was ready to see behind. Then came the voice from the committee chair. Congresswoman Crockett, you may proceed. She didn't, not yet. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, fingers tapping once, twice, on the envelope. Her voice, when it finally came, was not raised, not rushed. It was calm, clear, and merciless. Mr. Chairman, she began, can someone explain why a dinner receipt, was marked classified. The silence that followed was not polite. It was paralysis. Trump's smirk faltered. His legal aide leaned in sharply, whispering behind one hand. A pen dropped somewhere in the room. The microphones picked up a deep exhale from a staffer who'd been holding their breath far too long. Jasmine leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving the envelope. She didn't open it. Not yet. She let the questions sit in the air like the scent of smoke before a fire. And for once, no one rushed to answer. Trump broke the pause first. "Let's talk about waste," he said, louder now, like volume could chase away truth. "Let's talk about handouts, freeloaders, the people bleeding this country dry while the rest of us work." He gestured, vaguely theatrical. "I didn't come here to be sermonized by someone who's made a career out of complaining." That was it. The word, freeloader, the same word he dropped into every campaign rally, every rallying cry, every tweet-turned podium. And this time it had found the wrong target. Jasmine uncapped her pen again. Click, and underlined a single word on her pad. Freeloader. One stroke, then another, then a third. The ink bled through the page. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because in less than 5 minutes, that envelope would expose who really dined like royalty, while 3.1 million Americans were told to skip dinner. And for the first time that day, Trump leaned forward, not to gloat, but because he knew he was no longer in control. And power, real power, doesn't like losing its grip. It flinches when cornered. It smiles wider when it feels the spotlight slipping. Trump leaned back slowly, the smooth leather of his chair creaking just enough to draw attention. His navy suit caught the light in all the right places. Tailored lines, crisp cuffs, a flag pin that glimmered beneath the chandelier. He looked like a man rehearsed in victory, but beneath the table, his fingertips began to tap. Subtle, rhythmic, not impatience, not boredom. A reflex from someone who suddenly needed the illusion of control more than the substance of it. He surveyed the room as if it were a stage built for him, not a chamber of accountability. One corner of his mouth curved upward into that now familiar signature smirk, equal parts defiance and condescension. The kind of expression that once bought him thunderous applause from stadiums filled with red hats and closed hearts. But today it landed differently. Across the room, Jasmine hadn't moved. Her posture remained still, upright, deliberate. But stillness was never passive with her. It was surgical, calculated, the kind of quiet that made the loudest men feel small without saying a word. Trump glanced at her, only briefly, then looked away just as quickly. She didn't meet his gaze. She didn't have to. Her presence was the indictment. So he spoke. "Let's talk about freeloading," he said, voice steady, a calculated drawl aimed not at her, but at the cameras. "Let's talk about the real drain on this country, the ones who take and give nothing back but complaints, excuses, and demands." He paused, scanning for reaction. "People who think hardship makes them heroes, who weaponize poverty like it's a resume." The words slithered out of his mouth with practiced ease. He was setting a trap, but not for Jasmine. For the narrative, for the headlines. He wanted the clip. He wanted the fury. It was the strategy of a showman, not a statesman. From the GOP bench came murmurs of agreement, the low growl of partisan support. Representative Matt Gaetz gave a slow clap, deliberate and mocking. Representative Elise Stefanik nodded faintly, her eyes not on Trump but on the clock, measuring not minutes but damage. But across the aisle there was no fury. Not yet. Just silence. Jasmine's hands never left the table. She made a single slow note on her yellow pad, then underlined the word again. Freeloader. This time the ink bled clean through to the cardboard backing. She didn't speak, because she knew what came next wasn't a rebuttal. It was a reckoning. Trump leaned forward now, elbows on the desk, fingers steepled as if in prayer. But this wasn't humility. It was pageantry. "You know what the problem is?" he asked the room, rhetorical and performative. "We reward failure. We elevate victims. We make villains out of people who build." And then louder, my administration is about winners. It's about working Americans. It's about cutting waste, ending handouts, and holding people accountable for their choices. A few murmurs of "that's right" echoed through the back row, but they didn't stick. They sounded rehearsed, brittle, hollow, because the envelope on the table still sat there, untouched, undenied, unopened. And it was glowing now, not with light, but with dread. Jasmine slowly turned to a fresh page. Her face remained neutral, but something in her expression shifted, like the first chill of wind before a coming storm. Not fury, not indignation, just resolve, so thick it made the air heavier. Trump pressed forward. You don't fix this country by crying into cameras and passing around lunchboxes. You fix it by telling the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. And here's the truth. People need to work, not wait for handouts. He smiled again, this time too wide. You don't end hunger with hashtags. You end it with ways. But the room wasn't breathing the same anymore. Not the aides, not the Democrats, not even the Republicans. Because Jasmine Crockett hadn't said a word. And yet he was already sweating. He didn't realize what he'd done, not yet. He didn't realize that with one smug monologue, he'd painted himself into a corner. Because today, Jasmine hadn't come to talk. She came with proof, and when she finally looked up, slowly, precisely, the room seemed to lean with her. Her eyes scanned the length of the committee table, from left to right, absorbing every posture, every smirk, every averted gaze. Then she settled on him, not as a challenger, not even as an opponent, as a witness. And witnesses don't get to hide behind applause lines. Trump opened his mouth again, eager for another soundbite, but she beat him to it with just one sentence. Not loud, not theatrical, just one line, quiet as thunder. Tell me, Mr. President, how many families missed dinner while you dined on silence? And that was when the room changed. Because for the first time since he stepped into the building, Donald Trump didn't have a response. Not a quip, not a grin, not even a smirk. The lights above the chamber dimmed just slightly, not by design, but by something harder to measure. Presence, and the man who always had something to say had nothing left to stand on. The silence that followed wasn't passive. It wasn't awkward. It was surgical. The kind of stillness you only get in operating rooms and courtrooms right before something is about to be revealed or removed. Jasmine Crockett hadn't moved. Her expression didn't shift. She didn't straighten her spine or lean into the microphone like a showman. She simply existed, and in that existence, she filled the chamber more completely than any voice had all day. Trump blinked. Not a lot, just once. But in politics, sometimes a blink is more honest than a statement. Jasmine still said nothing. She didn't need to. She reached forward, not fast, not hesitant, and with two fingers pushed the manila envelope exactly 1 inch closer to the microphone. The sound was imperceptible, but the meaning was seismic. This wasn't a performance. It was a warning. A psham, lit without flame. The cameras didn't pan, they didn't zoom, they just locked. On her hand, on the envelope, on the micro movements that communicated something more potent than shouting ever could. I know what's in here. You don't. And that terrifies you. Staffers behind her began to shift. Phones that had been halfway raised were now still. A reporter lowered her tablet. The live captioning feed on C-SPAN seemed to stall for a moment, as if the algorithm itself was waiting to see if this stillness meant anything. It did. It meant everything. Because Washington is a city built on noise. Sound bites, talking points, interrupted hearings, carefully managed outrage. And yet here, now, the most powerful weapon in the room was not noise. It was Jasmine's silence. And silence that deliberate is never empty. It's full of threat, of meaning, of truth not yet spoken. Her hand, steady as stone, hovered above the envelope for a second longer. Not theatrically, not for effect, but because she was listening, not to Trump, not to the chair, but to the room itself, to the hearts pounding in real time. to the breathless hush of a gallery full of people who suddenly weren't watching a hearing, but a reckoning. Across from her, Trump shifted again, just slightly, his fingers unlaced, his jaw tightened. For the first time, he no longer looked like a man who was seated at the center of power. He looked like a man bracing for impact. And Jasmine, she just clicked her pen. That single, sharp sound cracked the quiet like a lightning bolt through glass. Click, tick. 2 strokes on the yellow pad. Not words, just a mark. The kind of mark a lawyer makes when they know the witness has already perjured themselves. And all that's left is to bring the evidence to light. She tapped the envelope once with the cap of her pen. Still no words. But across the aisle, Rep. Matt Gaetz leaned in, whispering something harsh and fast to the aide beside him. Elise Stefanik's smile faded just enough for the cameras to catch it. A GOP strategist in the third row reached for a bottle of water, missed the cap, and spilled a few drops onto his sleeve. These weren't dramatic moments. They were micro-fractures. And Washington knows a hairline crack in the wrong beam brings down a whole facade. Jasmine finally moved her eyes, not her head, just her eyes, slowly scanning the length of the dais. Her gaze passed over each representative like a silent audit. She saw everything: the narrowed eyes, the folded arms, the tapping shoes. She saw the ones who smirked, the ones who flinched, the ones who tried not to look at the envelope in front of her. She saw the fear, and she didn't blink. Still no speech, no declaration, only a hand reaching into the folder beside her, not to retrieve the envelope, but a single sheet of paper folded lengthwise like a courtroom exhibit. She unfolded it slowly. No flourish, no urgency, just precision, and laid it flat on the table next to the envelope. Now there were 2 items before her: the envelope that whispered danger, and a page that spelled it out. At that moment, something subtle happened. The audience in the gallery stopped moving entirely. Not even a chair creaked. And from somewhere behind a camera, someone exhaled so hard it was caught on mic. Trump leaned forward, not out of curiosity, but instinct. He was trying to reassert posture, reclaim oxygen. But he was too late, because Jasmine finally spoke. Her voice was not loud. It was measured, precise, and cut clean through the tension like a surgeon's blade through scar tissue. "Since we're talking about freeloading," she said, the phrase slow and loaded, "I thought it might be helpful to define exactly what that looks like on paper." She gestured softly to the document now resting beside the envelope. A scan of an executive dinner expense sheet, line items blurred slightly, timestamp clear, and bold red letters across the top. Classified. There was no gasp. Not yet. Just silence. Sharper now, taut with disbelief. Jasmine's hand slid across the table once more and tapped the words beneath the stamp. Private event, Mar-a-Lago. Date, March 18th. Amount, $243,568. Stillness, again, the kind that no longer asks for attention. It commands it. And in that stillness, Jasmine leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me again who the freeloader is." She didn't need to raise her voice. She lowered the ceiling, and when she did, the walls closed in on every man in that room who had once laughed off hunger, poverty, or pain as someone else's problem. She sat back, no victory, no smirk, just stillness. Because in Washington, stillness means one of 2 things: a bluff or a bomb. And Jasmine Crockett was never bluffing. She tapped her tablet, once, quietly, deliberately. Behind her, the screen flickered to life. No sound, no voiceover, no music swell to telegraph what was about to unfold. Just one image, stark, icy, a scanned receipt, grainy, blown up for legibility. The top header read, Mar-a-Lago Executive Dinner, Private Donor Event. Below that, total amount, $243,568.17. The number glowed, white against black, like a wound forced into the open. The first line item rolled across the screen in slow, almost cruel progression. Wagyu A5 rib cap steak, 435 per plate. Louis XIII cognac, 17 bottles, $4,760 each. Imported crystal glassware, one-time use only, $9,800. Live cello trio from Vienna, $22,000. Service fee, non-negotiable, $36,000. A murmur rippled through the gallery, low and involuntary, like the collective exhale of a nation catching the scent of something rotten. On screen, the numbers scrolled down slowly, unforgiving in their precision. Jasmine didn't narrate. She didn't need to. The page was speaking for itself. Every dollar was a syllable in a story of indifference. Trump's face, moments ago smug, was now locked in tight stillness. Not out of strategy, but self-preservation. His attorney leaned over and whispered something sharp and rapid, flipping through a leather binder with shaking fingers. The GOP bench looked uncomfortable, glancing sideways, adjusting papers that no longer mattered. And Jasmine? She finally spoke. Her voice was calm but hollowed, stripped of any performance. It didn't rise, it didn't fall. It simply carried, like truth tends to, when it no longer asked for permission. On the same night, she began, this dinner was served to 35 donors under a chandelier imported from Florence. She tapped her finger softly against the screen. The Department of Agriculture issued a memo. Her hand moved, slow and sure, and another page replaced the receipt. This one was cold, bureaucratic. A government directive. Emergency SNAP allocations. Termination effective immediately. Affected, 3.1 million households. States 32. She let the silence sit again, then drew the connection with surgical efficiency. No warning, no bridge program, no phase-out. Her eyes moved across the room. Just one decision, and 3.1 million families woke up the next morning with nothing in their grocery budget but air. Across the aisle, Representative Dan Newhouse shifted uncomfortably. His fingers clenched slightly around a water bottle. Rep. Maria Salazar glanced down at her notes, her pen paused in midair. And on the far right end, Trump spoke. Barely. Coincidence, voice muttered, voice tight, dismissive. Yes, just bad timing. Jasmine didn't turn toward him. She didn't need to. She reached into her binder and pulled out another page. Thicker paper stock this time. Government watermark clearly visible. This is a reallocation memo from the USDA, she said, placing it beside the previous two documents. Dated March 16, 2 days before that dinner. It redirects $18.4 million from food benefits to something called Public Engagement Strategy Pilot Programming. She looked up. I suppose feeding donors is public engagement now. The words didn't echo. They detonated, quietly, methodically, in the bones of every person in that room who had once called a budget cut necessary. She stepped back from the mic, not dramatically, not to perform, just enough to let the documents breathe on their own. And the more they breathed, the more oxygen was pulled from the room. Trump sat frozen. No longer the orator, no longer the game show host turned kingmaker. Just a man, caught on paper with a steak in his hand while the country went hungry. A staffer behind the dais audibly muttered, "No way," under their breath. The screen faded to black, but the damage had been done, because in that room no one could unsee the number $243,886. No one could unfeel the contrast between Wagyu beef and mother's boiling ramen with powdered milk. And no one, no matter how seasoned or partisan, could frame that receipt as anything less than obscene. Jasmine sat back slowly, fingers folding around her pen again. No applause, no smirk, just gravity. Because she hadn't exposed a scandal. She'd exposed a value system. And value systems don't collapse with outrage. They collapse with proof. Her eyes drifted across the room once more, but this time they weren't searching for reaction. They were scanning for courage and finding very little. The silence returned, but now it was heavier. Because now everyone in that room knew exactly what was in the envelope and what it had cost the country to pretend otherwise. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply reached beneath the folder and pulled out a small black USB drive. No label, no case, just raw data. She held it in her palm like it weighed more than gold. "Mr. Chairman," she said calmly, "I'd like to submit a supplemental exhibit for the record." There was no objection. There couldn't be. Not in that moment. She handed it to an aide with quiet authority. He inserted it into the console below the dais. The screen behind the chamber blinked once, then faded from black to grainy video. No music, no editing, just the truth. Raw, handheld, and shaking slightly. A kitchen, stainless steel, empty. Then a man appeared in frame. Early 40s, salt and pepper stubble, chef's white stained at the cuffs. A name embroidered faintly above his heart. Omar Ruiz. He stood before the camera like a man testifying in church, not politics. "My name is Omar," he began, voice low, eyes never leaving the lens. "I worked at Mar-a-Lago for 4 years. I ran the executive kitchen, staffed donor events, private dinners, state fundraisers. I remember March 18th very clearly." He paused, not for drama, just to steady his breath. "That night, we plated 17 courses, imported foie gras, truffle foam, A5 Wagyu, 43 pounds of it. Not all of it was eaten. Some guests asked for seconds. Others left half their steaks untouched." He looked down. "All of it, what wasn't served, we had to toss by midnight. Strict waste policy. No leftovers go home. No exceptions. We filled 2 industrial bins with what was left." The room didn't move. Omar's voice cracked slightly as he continued. "I texted my wife from the walk-in freezer. She was home with our daughter. Said she was boiling water to stretch the powdered milk. Snap had just been cut off. Her balance read 0 ton. She was crying because she had nothing left for the week." He looked back into the camera, eyes hollow. "And I remember hearing one of the donors raise a toast. He said, and I quote, 'The problem with this country is the freeloaders. Let them go hungry. They'll learn.'" A pause, he swallowed hard. I had to smile, pretend I agreed because I needed the job. Behind him, the video shifted. Static, then grainy security footage. Industrial trays stacked with uneaten steak. Waitstaff scraping pristine cuts into trash bins. Bottles half finished, dumped into sinks. The quiet efficiency of excess disposal. It played with no commentary, because it didn't need any. Back in the hearing room, no one breathed. Then the footage cut back to Omar, seated now, shoulders slumped, hands clasped. "They called us freeloaders," he said, eyes distant, voice barely above a whisper. "But I fed kings and couldn't feed my own family." That line didn't just land, it sliced. Even the Republican side of the chamber sat motionless, chins lowered, arms folded across chests that suddenly felt too small for what they were holding. Jasmine didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The truth had spoken itself. Trump shifted, breaking the tension with a sharp motion, slamming his hand lightly against the table. "He was fired," he snapped, his voice sharp, desperate to reclaim footing. "He broke protocol. That's it. He wasn't credible." But Jasmine didn't even flinch. Her gaze remained steady. "He wasn't fired for conduct," she replied, her voice still calm. "He was fired 2 days after he asked where the excess food budget was going." Silence again. Except this time it wasn't shame. It was impact. The screen behind her froze on Omar's face, tired, lined with quiet grief, but unflinching. The face of a man who had fed opulence while sleeping beside poverty. The kind of truth that can't be spin-doctored. The kind that stays with you long after the headlines fade. Jasmine turned slightly, not to the chairman, not to Trump, but to the chamber itself. "What kind of country," she asked softly, "throws away steak and calls the chef a beggar?" No one answered, because there was no answer, not one that could survive daylight. She turned off the screen. The room remained dim, though no one had touched the lights. The air had changed. She looked down at her notes again, not to read but to gather herself. to gather the rage, the sorrow, the weight of a truth that no one wanted, but everyone now carried. And then she said it, quiet and slow. But sure, let's talk about freeloading. There was a pause, not the kind that begs for reaction, the kind that clears the air to make room for impact. Jasmine leaned to her side, lifted a soft cloth bag from the floor beside her chair, and placed it gently on the desk in front of her. Her movements were slow, reverent, like she was handling something sacred. Then, with both hands, she reached inside and pulled out a small, worn pink lunchbox. The chamber didn't move. It was faded, the color dulled by time. One plastic corner was cracked, and a glittery sticker of a smiling cartoon star was peeling at the edge. It wasn't clean, but it wasn't dirty either. It was used, belonged to someone real, someone young. She didn't open it immediately. She let the room look at it first, let them sit with it. This, she was saying without words, is what you've all forgotten. This is the thing your spreadsheets don't capture, your policy briefs don't mention. This lunchbox, she said, belongs to Ellie Davis. She's 9 years old. Her mother, Staff Sergeant Naomi Davis, served 2 tours in Iraq. She's a Purple Heart recipient, honorably discharged, currently working full-time in a warehouse in Des Moines. She paused. Naomi also just lost $223 per month in food assistance due to a reallocation signed by this administration. Jasmine opened the lunchbox slowly, one latch at a time. Inside was nothing but a single slice of white bread, slightly folded, the edges dry, almost cracking. No peanut butter, no spread, no fruit, no water, nothing else. A gasp rippled across the gallery, quiet but sharp, like the kind of sound people make when they have just realized something shameful about their own silence. Jasmine reached in again and removed a small folded note, written in purple crayon on a torn piece of notebook paper. She unfolded it carefully, then held it up for the cameras to see. The letters were uneven, childlike, honest. "Sorry, baby, mommy's trying, I love you." "Mommy," Jasmine's voice trembled, not from weakness, but from restraint. She read the note aloud, every syllable carrying the weight of 2 wars, one in Iraq and one at home. And suddenly all the numbers faded. The policy memos, the line items, the economic justifications, they all disintegrated in the presence of that single sentence, written in wax and desperation. Trump sat frozen, not out of control, not calculating, just quiet. Repression Thomas Keene, a moderate Republican, lowered his eyes and pressed his lips into a tight line. Maria Salazar dabbed beneath her eye with a tissue she tried to pretend wasn't there. Matt Gaetz muttered something, but no one laughed. Even his bench ignored him. Jasmine didn't look around. Her eyes were fixed on the lunchbox. She reached out and gently closed the lid, as if protecting something fragile. "Ellie's mom didn't fail her daughter," she said, voice now firmer. "She worked full-time. She followed the rules. She served this country. And now, because of a policy decision made behind closed doors, her daughter is eating bread and leaving behind crayon apologies instead of real lunches." She stood slowly, carrying the lunchbox with both hands. She walked it to the center of the committee table and set it down, carefully, like placing a flower at a grave. Then she stepped back and faced the room. All sick earned him, not just the lawmakers, but the cameras. The millions watching at home from kitchen tables and hospital beds and break rooms and bus stops. And she asked the question no one wanted to hear, but everyone needed to answer. "Tell me, Mr. President, is this your definition of strength?" Trump didn't speak. He didn't blink. He looked at the lunchbox once and then away like it burned. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She walked back to her seat and sat, hands folded in front of her, gaze steady, the pink lunchbox now resting on the cold mahogany like a monument to everything this hearing was supposed to pretend wasn't real. And in that moment, even the people who'd come to defend budgets and cut costs knew this wasn't about money anymore. This was about dignity, about hunger, about a mother trying, and a nation not listening. And suddenly the hearing didn't feel like a hearing. It felt like a confession. One no one was ready to make, but Jasmine had already made it for them. She didn't move right away. She let the room sit with the pink lunchbox like candle burning in the center of a church. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent, weighty, charged with the kind of emotional current no gavel could silence. Then, without a word, Jasmine reached beneath her folder again. Not with flair, not with showmanship, just quiet certainty. Her fingers slid across the inner flap, and this time what she retrieved wasn't evidence of excess. It was something worse, intention. She unfolded a printed document, 4 pages thick, with a visible crease down the center, like it had been hastily folded. A red header glared across the top of the first page. Confidential strategic briefing, elite dinner doctrine. Wealth first, optics second. And just like that, the oxygen shifted again. This, she said, holding the memo up for the cameras, was not submitted through official channels. It wasn't leaked to a journalist. It was slid under my hotel door at 2:13 a.m. by a congressional staffer whose name I will not release for her own safety. She looked directly at the chairman. She was crying when she called me, whispering, said she thought someone was watching her hallway. She didn't want to send an email. She printed one copy, folded it, and walked it to my room. She tapped the paper once. This is that copy. She laid it flat beside the lunchbox like an open wound and began to read aloud. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't shout. It carved through the stillness like a scalpel made of reason. Do not publicly sympathize with food cuts. Emphasize economic discipline. Frame hunger as a result of personal failure, not systemic design. A visible wince spread through the GOP side of the room, repeating. Elise Stefanik leaned toward Trump, whispering fast. Matt Gaetz rubbed the back of his neck. Jim Jordan looked away. Jasmine turned the page. Avoid terminology such as relief, equity, or need. Use language like independence, incentive, and self-reliance. Prioritize messaging that reflects strength, not softness. Remove compassion from the frame. She didn't add commentary. She didn't need to. The memo was a masterclass in cold-blooded manipulation, weaponizing language to sanitize cruelty and turn suffering into a branding problem. She flipped to the third page. Reinforce the narrative that poverty is circumstantial, not structural. Attribute economic hardship to poor choices and cultural dysfunction. Avoid discussion of wage inequality, healthcare costs, and generational debt. Trump finally spoke. This is fake. We've never seen that document. It's manufactured propaganda, a political stunt. Jasmine didn't look at him. She looked at the cameras. It's real, she said. Verified independently by 2 legislative ethics staffers. The metadata matches. The watermark is consistent with internal distribution. And if anyone in this room wants to challenge its authenticity, now's your moment. No one did. Not a single hand went up. Not a single voice stood in defense. Even Trump's legal counsel stayed seated, lips sealed, eyes down. She turned to the final page. Use hunger strategically. Message it as a temporary discomfort with long-term benefit. Remind voters that adversity breeds character. Use stories of former food stamp recipients who now oppose the program. Shield donors from backlash by framing benefits as unsustainable and exploitative. Jasmine looked up and her voice lowered, not in volume, but in temperature. This isn't a memo, she said. It's a manual for cruelty. No one dared to speak because no one wanted to admit that behind every budget line, there had been a blueprint for justification. And now that blueprint was public. She stepped forward once more, tapping the table softly with the back of her knuckle. Let me be clear, she said. This lunchbox, she gestured, was not an accident. This bread-only meal was not a policy oversight. It was a strategic outcome. Designed, approved, enacted. And then she read one final line. One that hadn't made it into the earlier quotes, but that sat quietly at the bottom of page 4. Target snap cuts in Democratic-leaning districts. Shield Republican base with local food bank subsidies. The room cracked. Not audibly, not visibly, but morally. Repshaw's Thomas Keene Jr. turned pale. He flipped through his folder like searching for an exit. Staffers behind the GOP bench froze in place, waiting for someone, anyone, to interrupt. No one did. Jasmine closed the folder. Slowly, cleanly, like a casket lid, and with her voice now low and deliberate, she said, "You didn't cut hunger. You just outsourced the pain. And now you're choking on the silence." No one dared clap, because there was nothing left to applaud, only to reckon with. Jasmine didn't sit down. She didn't retreat into her chair and call it a point made. No, she stayed standing, the weight of truth still burning in her hands, as she reached for one final sheet of paper, a procurement record printed on glossy stock, bordered in gold ink, as if someone had tried to make bureaucracy feel expensive. She held it up. "This is an official White House Event Services procurement invoice," she began, her voice low, but it no longer soft. "No. Approved and processed during the same fiscal quarter as the SNAP reallocations. I want you to pay attention." She tapped the document once. Item, cloth napkins, spec, presidential seal embroidered, 12 by 17, quantity 320 units. Use, single event, price per napkin, 12 balls, 47s. Total, $3,990.40. Laundry, twice, discarded. No one spoke. The number wasn't astronomical. But it wasn't the amount that made people shift in their seats. It was the message. $12 for one napkin, used twice, thrown away. Jasmine let that image simmer in the room. Not just the cost, but the disposability. Meanwhile, she continued, pulling out a second document, this one less elegant, printed on thin copy paper and marked in red. This memo, issued the same week, documents a budget adjustment from the Department of Health and Human Services. She paused and read slowly. Line 12, adult incontinence supplies. Allocation, Southeast Regional Long-Term Care Facilities. Adjustment, $790. Status, permanent. The contrast was not theoretical. It was cruel math. One line item, she said, raising the napkin invoice, gave dinner guests luxury cloth to wipe steak sauce from their mouths. She raised the second. The other took away dignity from our elders in nursing homes, many of whom served in Korea and Vietnam, many of whom now sit in silence, embarrassed, soiling themselves with no supplies left to change into. The room didn't gasp this time. There were no sharp inhales. It was worse. There was stillness, a kind of quiet too heavy to be discomfort, too dense to be strategy. It was shame, pure and unadorned. Trump fidgeted slightly, adjusting his cufflinks as if suddenly the gold felt tighter than usual. Matt Gaetz sat stone-faced, but his jaw clenched with every syllable. Elise Stefanik scribbled something into her notepad, though her pen never actually moved. And then Jasmine delivered the question that would hang in the air for days. Why does dignity cost more in steakhouses than in nursing homes? No one answered. Because how do you defend a linen policy against human suffering? She stepped toward the center of the room, napkin invoice in one hand, budget cut memo in the other. Let me be even clearer, she said. We spent $12.47 per guest, per napkin, twice laundered and discarded, to decorate a meal. She held up the second document again. And we cut less than $800 total from elder care supply chains. Not for waste, not for fraud, but because someone needed public optics rebalancing. At the back of the chamber, a woman rose. Her name tag read, Harriet Booker. Jasmine motioned toward her. Ms. Booker, she said, please tell them what that cut meant where you work. The woman walked slowly forward, early 60s, deep lines around her eyes, hands clasped in front of her nursing scrubs. I've worked in long-term elder care for 32 years, Harriet began, her voice raw but grounded. We ran out of adult diapers 3 weeks ago. Not for a day, not a shipment delay. We ran out, period. For 5 days, we used cut-up towels. folded twice, pinned, some leaked. We cleaned the residence ourselves. Some cried, some didn't even notice. And no one from D.C. called to ask how we were managing. She looked at Trump, not with anger, just disappointment. They never call when it's nursing homes. She returned to her seat in silence, and Jasmine looked back to the room, the napkin still in hand, like a relic from a parallel universe. We have reached a point, she said, voice steady, where table settings get more planning than public service. She returned to her desk, laid the napkin invoice next to the pink lunchbox, and stood still. You call this fiscal discipline. I call it a choice to preserve image and erase the people who built this country. No rebuttal came. No one stood to defend the napkins. Because what do you say when linen gets more life than the living? The silence didn't comfort anyone anymore. It pressed against the walls, thick and breathless, like the aftermath of an earthquake. Jasmine stood motionless, flanked by a pink lunchbox and a $12 invoice that had become something greater than itself, evidence of moral rot. And that was when the stillness broke, clumsily, bitterly. Trump leaned forward, his voice sharp like a chipped blade. You people always play victim. The words hit the chamber like a slap in a funeral home. Sharp, disrespectful, too loud for the quiet that had just made itself sacred. Heads turned, not in agreement, but in disbelief. His mic hadn't even picked it up cleanly, but it didn't have to. The room heard it. The intent was louder than the volume. Jasmine's body didn't move, but her gaze shifted, slow and lethal, like steel unsheathing itself from velvet. She didn't blink. She didn't react with fire. She turned fully toward him with a silence more dangerous than shouting. You mean, she said, voice cold enough to stop a pulse, black mothers or poor ones? Trump opened his mouth, but the rest of the sentence died there, frozen in the heat of his own spotlight. She didn't give him time to dig deeper. She turned to the touchscreen beside her. Tapped twice, the screen behind the chamber flickered, and then came the data, a color-coded chart. Stark, unapologetic. Poverty rates by race and ethnicity, United States. Source, U.S. Census Bureau. The bars rose on screen like headstones. Black families, 24.2%. Latino families, 19.8%. Indigenous households, 25.4%. White families, 8.6%. She stepped aside, arms folded lightly, eyes fixed on the screen. Let's take your accusations seriously for a moment, she said. Let's say someone is playing victim. Let's say that narrative is real. She turned to the room, sweeping the crowd with her voice like a measured blade. Are these numbers the performance? Is hunger a costume? Is generational poverty just a well-rehearsed script passed down because we love pretending that working 2 jobs and still skipping dinner is somehow glamorous? No one answered. The screen shifted again. New chart. Children living below the poverty line. By race. Black children, 1 in 4. Latino children, 1 in Native American children. 1 in 3 white children, 1 in 10. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't drive the numbers in like a hammer. She let them hang, like portraits of lives the system pretends not to see. Then she asked a question that was not rhetorical. At what point do we stop calling it victimhood and start calling it pattern? Representative Jim Jordan shifted uncomfortably. Maria Salazar crossed her arms. Representative Thomas Keene Jr., who had remained quiet all morning, now stared at the screen with his brows furrowed. Not in disagreement, but recognition. Jasmine stepped forward once more. You want to talk about freeloaders, she said? Let's talk about the corporations that pay 0 in federal taxes while black mothers get shamed for buying groceries with EBT cards. Let's talk about the private jets that wrote off Mar-a-Lago dinners as political strategy sessions while school cafeterias serve frozen beans and call it lunch. Her voice remained controlled, but her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from magnitude. These numbers aren't new. They aren't shocking. They've been filed away, footnoted, buried in white papers and press releases. But today, You're going to look at them, and you're going to explain them. The screen shifted once more. This time it wasn't a bar chart. It was a pie graph labeled Federal Program Cuts, Impact Distribution by Region. The biggest slice? Southeast, majority black counties. Rural, low income, forgotten. Trump stood abruptly. This is manipulation, he snapped. You're spinning statistics, spinning feelings. This is about accountability, not playing the race card. The phrase hung in the room like rot. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She just said slowly, "You don't like the race card, Mr. President? Then stop stacking the deck." Dead silence, the kind that hurts to sit in, because no one in that room on either side of the aisle could deny that the deck had been rigged for a long, long time. And Jasmine Crockett had just named the dealer. But she wasn't done. She turned slow and steady and lifted the pink lunchbox from the table, both hands, as if it were a sacred object. No theatrics, just weight, the kind you don't see, but feel. She stepped out from behind the microphone and began walking, past the table, past the dais, past the cameras, into the rows of lawmakers who had spent the better part of their careers debating numbers, not people. One by one, she placed the lunchbox in front of them. She didn't say a word, just let them open it. The first was Rep. Linda Grisham, a Democrat from New Mexico. She opened the latch slowly as if the plastic might scream. When she saw the slice of white bread inside, folded in on itself, limp, alone, her lip trembled. She blinked hard, then nodded once, unable to speak. Jasmine took it back without a word and moved on. Next was Rep. Thomas Keene Jr., moderate Republican, war veteran, budget hawk. He looked at it for a running round before even reaching out. His hand hovered over the latch like it was hot. When he opened it and saw the single crayon note folded beneath the bread, "Mommy's trying," he didn't cry, but he shook. A tremor in the fingers, a hard swallow. His voice caught in his throat. She wrote that," he whispered. Jasmine nodded. Purple crayon, torn notebook, real girl, real lunch, real America. He nodded slowly, almost ashamed to be surprised. Jasmine took it back and kept walking. Each step was a reckoning, not a stunt, not a performance, a quiet confrontation. A tour of reality through a box too small to hold anything but a sandwich in a broken system. She stopped at Representative Maria Salazar. The congresswoman didn't open it. She couldn't. She turned her face to the side, eyes wet, jaw clenched. Jasmine didn't press. She just let the box sit there for 6 seconds, 6 long seconds, before picking it up again and moving forward. Some looked, some couldn't. A few whispered apologies they didn't have the authority to make. Others whispered nothing because they had no idea what to say. And then Jasmine stopped in front of Donald Trump. She didn't smile, didn't challenge him, just held out the lunchbox like she had for every other representative. Trump leaned back. "No," he said, firm, dismissive. "I'm not part of your show." Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't move her hand. Her voice didn't rise. It cooled. "This isn't a show," she said. "This is his lunch." He stared at the box like it carried disease. "I'm not touching that," he muttered. And Jasmine, without hesitation, said the line that would be replayed across every screen in the country by nightfall. "No, you don't touch props. You touch lives." The words cracked through the chamber louder than any gavel, because in that moment, the distinction between reality and rhetoric became undeniable. "You've signed papers that touch that lunchbox 1,000 times," she continued. "You've never held it, but you've shaped it. You've cut it. You've made sure what's inside it doesn't grow." Trump shifted in his chair, eyes hard, silent. Jasmine stepped back. She didn't press it into his hands. She didn't throw it at him. She simply walked back to the podium, the lunchbox still in her grip, heavier now with what it had revealed. "Some of you were brave enough to open it," she said, "and I thank you." She looked around. "Some of you couldn't, I understand." Her gaze narrowed. "And some of you? refused. The silence that followed was no longer sacred. It was accusatory. "This country will never heal," she said, "until the hands that write the rules are willing to carry what they break." She placed the lunchbox on the podium right next to her yellow pad and closed it with both hands. "Until then, this little girl's lunch is this government's report card." No one moved, no one spoke, because now every single person in the room had seen it, touched it, or chose not to, and that choice would follow them home. Jasmine Crockett didn't sit, not yet. She looked out over the room, not searching for permission, not for consensus, just ensuring that every eye met the moment one last time. Then, with a calm steadiness that carried more weight than rage ever could, she turned to the digital display screen behind her and tapped one final image into place. It appeared without sound. No motion, no text, just a still frame. A table, a white tablecloth, slightly wrinkled, a single ceramic plate placed dead center, but no food. No fork, no knife, no cup, no chair, just one napkin folded neatly on the plate. Alone. Jasmine let it sit there, let the image breathe in the room. She stepped to the side, not to explain it, but to let it speak for itself. "This," she said, her voice level, "is America's dinner table." Not a metaphor, not a slogan, not a metaphorical flourish, a mirror. The screen shifted slowly. Split screen. On the left, a photo from Mar-a-Lago's private dining salon. White-gloved servers, candlelight gleaming off cutlery. Wagyu beef sliced with surgical precision beside sautéed lobster tails. Gold-rimmed china. Imported linen napkins. A wine list as thick as a Bible. On the right, a paper plate. 3 saltine crackers. Plastic spoon, cracked handle. A juice box half empty. A single fluorescent light above flickering. Jasmine didn't narrate. She didn't cry. She paused to let the room absorb what every statistic had been trying to say. Then she stepped forward. "So ask yourself," she said quietly, "when you hear someone say, 'Everyone in this country has a seat at the table,'" she turned to face the chamber head on. "Do they mean this one?" She gestured left toward the Wagyu. "Or this one?" She gestured right toward the saltines. "And if it's the second," she added, voice sharpening, "was there ever a chair to begin with?" Not a soul moved, because the truth wasn't theoretical anymore. It was visual, tangible to Baum. You could see the theft now. You could feel it. Not in laws, not in policy, but in what was missing from one plate to the next. She let the image hold for 10 more seconds. No music, no crescendo, just reality. And then she turned off the screen. The silence that followed was not empty. It was changed. There was no applause, no clapping, no thunder of chairs scraping back in performative respect. Only the quiet realization, shared by every person in that room, that something inside them had shifted. Not politically, but morally. Because once you see the empty plate, you can't unsee it. Once you know there were 2 tables, you'll never again believe the lie that there was only one. Jasmine finally returned to her seat. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired, but not defeated. She looked like a woman who had finished the work, not won a fight. And outside that room, across the nation, a million screens glowed in kitchens, in nursing homes, in shelters, in classrooms, in diners, in cars pulled over on the side of the highway, with Americans sitting in stunned silence, watching not a scandal, but a sermon. Not a hearing, but a verdict. And the verdict wasn't declared. It was felt. No one would forget the pink lunchbox, the purple crayon, the steak invoice, the discarded napkins, the voicemail, the chef, the little girl with no peanut butter, the photo of a plate that held nothing. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a reckoning. And Jasmine Crockett didn't need permission to deliver it. This hearing wasn't just about corruption or inequality. It exposed a deeper wound. Hunger in America isn't caused by scarcity. but by deliberate decisions. When a child unwraps a dry slice of bread with a crayon note saying, "Mommy's trying," while elites dine on Wagyu and gold-threaded napkins, the issue isn't economics. It's engineered cruelty. Jasmine Crockett reminded the nation, silence is not neutral. The pink lunchbox wasn't a prop, it was a mirror reflecting not just policy failure, but moral collapse. Her quiet question, who really gets a seat at America's table, wasn't rhetorical. It demanded reckoning. And that reckoning came, not with applause, but with a stillness so deep, even power couldn't escape it. Because when facts are ignored, images speak. And when the image is an empty plate, the country can no longer look away. If this story unsettled you, don't scroll. Sit with it, let it ache. Then share it. Because somewhere tonight, a mother is still packing a lunch she can't afford. Like, comment, and send this to someone who still thinks silence is neutral. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where we don't sanitize truth, we show it. Tap the bell, because the next chapter won't be softer, it'll be sharper. And it just might change the way you define justice. This story is a fictional dramatization. But the hunger, the systems, and the silence, they're real. And any resemblance to actual people or events isn't accidental. It's intentional for public reckoning and reflection. Thanks for watching. Justice isn't inherited. It's confronted. This is Harrison Stories.